The crisis of language is the crisis of self. There is no crisis of language actually, because language can say everything. There is nothing that language cannot express. Earlier on I thought that there was a crisis when it comes to language, because language cannot express or convey reality, which of course to some sense is true, because language cannot convey in 3 dimensions, cannot express our own experience of our own perception and consciousness and existence while we talk, while we speak, while we talk. Language cannot express. Language cannot express the 3-dimensional truth or situation or existence of the human being as an experience of his own perception and as an experience of his own ideas that he communicates through language. But I've come to see that there is no real crisis in language, or there is no real problem with language, because language can convey and express everything, every idea, everything that we feel. Language can express in a 1-dimensional or perhaps a 2-dimensional medium. And with our own experience of language, we have the experience of communication constituted by language in 3 dimensions. So the crisis of language is not because of language itself, it is because of the self of the human being, because every product of the self is invalid. And why? This is because the human self is just a product of the human being. We create our own self because we need it in order to communicate, in order to produce, in order to organize ourselves in the world and so on. We need this self because we have to be ourselves. We have to be someone. We have to be a person that goes somewhere, that performs certain kind of actions and thinks and feels and all this crap, as you know. Well, human beings create their own self because we need it. We need the self as an instrument, as a tool for survival, as a tool for communication, as a tool for production of any kind of thing, whether it's thought or the making of a factory, or cutting down a tree, or building a house, or whatever, or attaching to an emotion. That is also an action. Attachment to ideas and feelings are also actions of the self, or controlled by the self. The reason why the products of the self are invalid or not valid in a philosophical or scientific perspective is because the idea of self is just a construction. It's just an illusion, so to speak. The self is not an illusion, because it's a reality that we create ourselves, but it is temporary and it has no real self to it. There is no substance to it. It's only an idea. The self is just an idea that we attach to, and we make this idea the center of our life. That this self is the self of me, or the self of the human being. And that's why there is a problem with language, because language is expressed by the self. Language is expressed by this idea that the self creates. And the self creates it by necessity, because it has to do it in order to communicate, and to communicate means to survive for the human being, for the animal of the human being, so to speak. So the human self is a tool that we need. It's an instrument that we use in order to survive, in order to produce, in order to communicate, in order to organize, and to become ourselves, so to speak, though this ourselves is just an idea of ourselves, because as we have said, the human self is just a product, it's an idea of the human being for him, so that he can constitute himself as a someone, as a self, because the self is the business of the world, is the business of humanity. Without a self you're nothing, except perhaps a very wise Zen Buddhist. But you need the self in order to compete on the global market, in order to be who you want to be, in order even to be who you are, because the self is a house for the non-self. The non-self is of course the nature in the human being. Every human being is the non-self, and in this non-self we can find Buddha nature, as people are concerned about, because it is the voidness, it's the suchness, it's the emptiness of Buddhism, so to speak, the nothingness. The non-self is the nature, the pure experience of the human being inside the human being, and the self is the product of the human being, the idea of himself, or the idea of a person or of someone that we need to constitute in order to produce, organize and communicate. And the problem of the self is a quite serious one when it comes to science, philosophy and art, because every product of the self makes the statement, makes language to some extent invalid because it's too limited. It's not limited only because of language, but it's limited because of the perspective of the self, because of the perspective of the product that we call the self. Alright, so that was just a reflection about language and self and humanity and business and all that. Okay, thank you.